city will be closing down the migrant shelter at the Roosevelt Hotel, and 53 other migrant shelters around the city by June. Do you believe the city's ready to close these shelters?
No, because it's like it's like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic.
So, New York City's flagship shelter, the Roosevelt Hotel, is finally closing down along with 53 other facilities. But this hotel and some of the other shelters house known gang members who use them as bases to plan and commit crime all over town. And as these places close down, New York City reveals it's not only learned nothing from this experience, but the city's actively opening new shelters which also have no safeguards in place to stop the wrong people from taking them over as well.
Well, the city announcing plans today to shut down one of its largest migrant shelters.
After 2 years, the Roosevelt Hotel will no longer operate as an intake center or emergency shelter.
The 450 remaining migrant families living in tents at Brooklyn's Floyd Bennett Field must move out.
They've been hearing rumors.
A new men's migrant shelter opening in New York City is leaving some neighbors absolutely furious. The new facility has 2,200 beds.
A dangerous South American street gang, Trende Aragua, has infiltrated city shelters, running illegal operations right under the noses of authorities.
I am now terrified. I'm terrified for me, for my students.
You should be ashamed.
At the peak 17 months ago, the city was welcoming 4,000 migrants per week, but things have dramatically changed. Last week, less than 400 showed up and about 1,000 left.
There's cops outside, and I think this is the most we've seen throughout the day of men lining up with their bags. And as you've said, people in the area, locals, are really upset.
So the most infamous of all New York City shelters will shut down permanently in just a few months. But what nobody's talking about is that New York City's right to shelter system that created the problems in that hotel and the entire asylum crisis, those aren't going anywhere. How are you? And as America's largest sanctuary city closes down some of its shelters, it's trying its best to secretly open new ones in other parts of town, like the Bronx, where a 2,000-person men's shelter is already up and running, much to the chagrin of nervous neighbors who say they weren't even told this place was coming to their very backyard. And even though most of the people living in these facilities aren't here to join gangs or break the law, as a sanctuary city, New York bans police from entering these facilities, which is why they're so easy for gang members and criminals to take over. A problem that didn't just happen at the Roosevelt Hotel, where the Trende Aragua gang has been operating for months, but also at other places like the Hall Street shelter in Brooklyn, which houses 3,000 people and has brought extreme gang activity to the quiet streets of Clinton Hill, something that our leaders thought would never happen, as that facility is sequestered between a highway overpass and the waterfront. Yet, because this city protects its criminals instead of locking them up, it did. Which brings us to the real reason why New York City's mega shelters are such a problem. The asylum crisis is over. You can no longer enter the country, apply for asylum, and wait around to see what happens. Which means the only new arrivals moving into our shelters are going to be people who can only live in America illegally. But as a sanctuary city that bans its officials from inquiring about anyone's immigration status, our shelter system will continue to remain open, acting as a magnet for those unlawfully in the country who want a free place to stay. However, there's a problem because the border is now closed and almost impossible to cross. And as you're about to see, this means the only people who do get through are going to be folks who are very tough and who have no plans other than living a life of crime once they get here. So here we have the Roosevelt Hotel, one of 54 facilities closing down in the next few months. And this is probably the most controversial of them all. It's a former luxury hotel. It's got about 1,000 rooms, and it's right here in the middle of Midtown. And for folks to get a free place to stay here, that was never something every New Yorker agreed with. But as places like this shut down because the asylum crisis is over, the city is actively replacing them with other facilities in different parts of town.
A new men's migrant shelter opening in New York City is leaving some neighbors absolutely furious. The new facility in the Bronx has 2,200 beds, and it's part of Mayor Adams' strategy to consolidate.
There is a ton of controversy surrounding this new facility that's opening up in the Bronx, but that controversy isn't because it's a luxury hotel in Midtown. It's not. And whereas the Roosevelt Hotel you see here is in a commercial part of town that isn't really a neighborhood, that's not the case with this new Bronx shelter. It's surrounded by apartments that house families. There are schools and playgrounds nearby. Locals are calling this new shelter in the Bronx their absolute worst fear, and they didn't even know it was coming until the last minute. And the reason people are worried is they know this is a sanctuary city that doesn't do background checks before moving people into its shelters, which is exactly what was happening here at the Roosevelt Hotel and how this place became so controversial and dangerous. And the folks living near this new facility are afraid that their neighborhood is going to become a home to gangs and the violence that they bring with them.
It's really very large. As you said, 2,200 people can be housed here. We've seen a pretty steady stream of people. There's cops outside, and I think this is the most we've seen throughout the day of men.
Now, it's important to understand that the folks moving into this new facility, they might be well-meaning, they might not be. They might have criminal records, they might not. We're never gonna know because the city doesn't do background checks before moving people into places like this. And it turns out that some of the people moving to this new Bronx shelter are coming from facilities that have a history of gang activity and dangerous incidents. And city officials have confirmed that many of the folks moving into the new Bronx shelter are coming from Randall's Island, which was one of the most dangerous shelters New York City operates. And according to the New York Post, this is a facility that functioned as the headquarters of this Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, where known gang members not only resided, but camped out nearby in pup tents after getting kicked out of the shelter or losing their placement due to it expiring. This shelter, when it was open, always had a heavy police presence, and at many times the unlawful encampments outside this place got so rough that the police had to go in and clear them out. However, they always seemed to keep coming back. Now, is everybody who lived at Randall's Island bad news? No, but if the entire population of that shelter is being relocated to this new one in the Bronx, how could the problems that existed in one place not be relocated as well? That's what neighbors are freaking out about.
I have never been afraid in South Bronx. I am now terrified. I'm terrified for me, for my students. I will have to move.
As literally someone that has lived this experience personally, you should be ashamed.
So people in the Bronx, they don't want to pay to house unvetted individuals who might be coming from places that are very dangerous in their neighborhoods by their families and near where their kids go to school. And that's the difference between the Bronx facility and the Roosevelt Hotel, which isn't in a neighborhood. Thus, you didn't have mass neighborhood protests when this place first opened up, even though everybody that took a look at it knew something wasn't right. And you've got progressives in other New York City neighborhoods who don't have shelters in them, who are watching this on the news and don't think this is a big deal. They don't think neighbors here should be making a big deal about this and that they're overreacting. But the new Bronx facility is actually very similar to this one on Hall Street, which also has its fair share of problems. And there were several gang-related incidents that took place here last summer. And just like the new Bronx facility, this Hall Street place, it's in an old industrial park type area. It's over by the highway. There aren't any apartments directly adjacent to it or across the street. And activists love saying that since buildings like this are empty, they'd be great places for shelters because there won't be any effect on the surrounding neighborhood. However, if you talk to the neighbors in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, they'll point out that there's constantly stuff going on underneath that highway overpass, which is against the law. And the problem is that if you allow unchecked crime in a building or in a certain part of town, it's gonna flow from that location to other locations. Here's a picture of some of the gang members that live in the Roosevelt Hotel in an article talking about crime in Midtown where it's located. And now the big question is, why on earth is the city doing this? If the asylum crisis is dwindling and less people than ever are coming here, why are we reopening new facilities after shutting down the ones we have?
Do you believe the city's ready to close these shelters?
No, because it's like it's like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. All they're gonna do, we have to house people.
Mayor Adams said the decision was made based on a major decrease in the number of incoming migrants. That number...
So when this local leader says that we have to house people, he's referring to the city's right to shelter obligations, which mandate that New York maintain emergency shelter options for people who need a temporary place to stay. And because places like the Roosevelt Hotel are so expensive to operate, once they can be shut down, the city is going to do it. But because they've still got people to take care of, they're going to move them to another, more affordable location. But because the border is now closed and less people than ever are coming here, there's now no longer any justification for keeping these shelters going in the first place other than it being a right. Because the rules have changed. People can no longer enter America and apply for asylum and wait in America to see how that case plays out. And what that means is new people arriving at these facilities and checking into them for the first time will not be eligible for asylum. And what that means is they do not have a potential legal pathway to a full-time legal existence in America. No, they can come here, but they'll have to live off the books as illegal residents of a sanctuary city. And this flies in the face of all of the reasons our leaders gave us to open up these massive shelters in the first place. The first thing we were told was that people were going to come here and get jobs right away, and that they weren't even going to need to live in these shelters for very long. Yet here we are over 2 years later, and the shelter system is still operating, and you've still got people living in tents in certain parts of town who got kicked out of those shelters and never got the jobs we were promised they would have been offered by now. And whereas asylum seekers could get work authorization in around 6 months, anyone coming to these places today will never get that because they can never apply for asylum, which raises another big question. What purpose do these shelters serve if the people in them cannot accomplish anything legal in America? Since they'll never qualify for legal employment, they can't come here and fill roles at companies or start businesses. And critics say the only thing they can do once they're here is hide from ICE. Now that the nature of the asylum crisis has changed and the only folks coming to New York and checking into these facilities cannot legally be part of that crisis, New York's got to decide what these places are actually accomplishing, because they're not a stepping stone to the American dream like they were set up to be for the majority of asylum seekers who actually had permission to wait here while their case played out. Now they're just a place in a sanctuary city where people can go if they want to live and not have to worry about police.
100%. So basically someone gets arrested, charged with a crime, they go remanded to custody of Rikers, and due to the sanctuary policies, they will not accept the immigration detainer nor the administrative warrant. So they just release the criminals right back into the community to reoffend, and there's a lot of recidivism with these.
So this guy, he's the head of the local New York ICE field office, and he's got the unenviable job of chasing gang members around our city and trying to apprehend them, in most cases after the city has released them back from a jail. Because since New York's laws ban the cooperation of our local police with federal immigration authorities, when our police catch someone and put them in the back of a police car and take them to jail, ICE will often ask for that person to be kept in custody so they can come pick them up, but our city doesn't do that. They release them. And this is how our shelter system became so dangerous. You've got people who get arrested and then get released from jail and get to go back to a shelter that is funded by the people of New York City. There's no requirement that someone maintain good behavior to live in one of these places because it's a right. And since police do not have the right to enter these facilities and patrol them and keep them safe from criminals, the criminals taking these places over are doing so unchallenged. They're the only law and order presence in these shelters. And if you lived in the Bronx and you knew that a shelter was coming to your neighborhood and that criminals and gang members were going to be moved in there because nobody cares if criminals and gang members move in there, you'd be pretty upset too, as there are a lot of potential criminals roaming our city right now.
Let's just talk about New York City so the audience can see a picture. We're talking about, I think the last number I heard, around 60,000 criminal migrants in the city. That does not include the gotaways. And we're not just talking about 60,000 people that are illegally in the country, but they have committed a crime, right?
That's correct. I remember.
That's insane. 60,000 criminals roaming our city who aren't even supposed to be in the country. That's more than the population of cities and towns in America. And that number is only going to grow because even though new arrivals are just a few hundred a week, they're all unable to seek asylum and therefore can only have come here to try and live as federal fugitives in a city that won't punish crime and therefore just enables them. And with New York City having decriminalized things like non-violent shoplifting, a pathetic opportunity exists for people to live as professional thieves who steal things things and then resell them on the side of the road to make money. And if they get arrested, they just get misdemeanor tickets, which has turned our justice system into a revolving door that just recycles its criminals. That right there is the very definition of enablement. And as long as we continue to have these laws that don't punish criminals, and as long as we continue to put criminals in hotels and give them places to stay, criminals are going to keep coming here.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, a lot of these people are bad actors. They're violent felons. And they have the upper hand in their apartments or residences. So when you're going in, you need to ensure you have safety and a show of force. And I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense unless you realize that New York City is a place with laws passed by people who think that the real problem we've got in America is that it's a country with a border, and now we've elected people who plan on enforcing it. That's the reason our leaders are doubling down on non-cooperation with ICE and are basically spitting in the faces of the men and women that keep our country safe, making their jobs deliberately harder by releasing dangerous felons back out onto the streets just so they can prey upon the law-abiding once again, or hunker down in apartments where they might be armed, planning to fight it out with federal agents when they finally track them down at great expense. But now the big question is, should New York City continue operating its shelter system? Remember, this system was set up and designed to help people who were here on their way to the American dream, but now all it can do is house criminals. That's what it is doing, and it deliberately protects them by banning police from going inside. Is that a good idea? And do residents of the Bronx even have a reason to be upset when the city is just carrying out the laws the people in it voted for? Let me know. Thank you so much. See you in the next video.